Alright, this is Chat UTD, reflecting on a much needed last gasp, dramatic and hard fought win against Burnley, but let's have it right. The game should have been done and dusted at half time with the chances that we had. The first half performance was really strong. There was energy, there was people expressing themselves, there was an aggression, there was a good atmosphere. Thought the crowd played their part. I think the crowd knew the team needed to win, the club needed a win, the manager needed a win. We all wanted a win desperately today. It doesn't matter that it was Burnley, you've just got to get over the line and get 3 points. And there was a good atmosphere at the start of the game. Everyone right behind it, and I don't know if the players fed off that or the crowd fed off the players, or maybe a little bit of both. But I thought the first half was, as I say, a first half of energy, dynamic football, front foot, great pressing, epitomised by Mason Mount when he robbed Walker of the ball, showed great strength, got away from him, was blatantly fouled. I don't think it was a penalty, but it was a foul. For the referee to take 5 minutes and then say a foul wasn't committed on the Man United player is nonsense, is ridiculous. As I say, probably not a penalty, but it's certainly a foul. Deservedly went a goal up. I thought we lost our way a little bit when Cunha went off, only for a little bit, and then we picked it back up again. And towards the end of the first half, Ahmad and Xerxes had big chances to pretty much rubber stamp the game. And if you miss them and it's only 1-0 at half time, when really, ideally, and on merit, you should be 3 or 4-0 up. Psychologically, the game's very different in the second half because Burnley have something to still some hope. I want to talk about Seshko. I think it's a feature of the first half for me was how the front three interchanged and changed positions, and there was a fluidity to it, which was quite good to watch. And when Cunha came off, and I hope, by the way, that's not a bad injury because he's been pretty promising so far. When he came off, everybody, of course, expected it to be Seshko, but I wonder if the manager thought, well, Xerxes is a player that probably can continue that interchanging of roles. He can play anywhere up top, slightly deeper to the right, slightly deeper to the left. He can play any of those roles. So it continued that kind of fluidity. It wasn't fixed positions as such. But if that's what the manager wants, I don't really know why he signed Seshko. Because we've spent £60 million on a focal point player, and it seems that in the first 3 games, that's not what he wanted. Because he's not started him in any of the games. The reason given today was that he played 90 minutes against Grimsby. Well, so he can start the game today, surely. So that's interesting. I think that's an interesting point in itself. On Seshko, just to sort of deviate a little bit from the order of the game, when he did come on, I think at times he's like the invisible man. He's a ghost. He just... sorry, it's windy. You don't see him for periods of time. I won't go as far to say as he hides, but he doesn't make himself present. He doesn't show for the ball very often. And when the ball's in and around him, he's not going and making it his. He leapt really high for a header. He had another moment where the ball came into him and he was in and around the box. But I think he needs to do more. And as I said, I think if this carries on with him not being picked, and then when someone goes off up front, he doesn't even come on, you've got to start asking, why have we spent £60 million on a focal point striker when the manager doesn't seem to want to use one, and we desperately need a midfielder and a goalkeeper? It seems odd to me. Maybe in the fullness of time this will all come to fruition and it'll be obvious why we've brought him in. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna open the window because it was too hot and now the bloody wind's blowing through. Excuse me. Second half, the problem being 1-0 up, when you know psychologically you should be 3 or 4-0 up, is there's a bit of a nervousness there. Our inability to defend balls across our box is a massive issue. It's not just from corners, it's not just from free kicks. Kyle Walker's was a long throw-in. One of the goals just came from a ball, just from open play where it went in the box. We struggled last week against Fulham with balls in the box. They scored a goal from one. We can't defend crosses. And whilst the defenders are defending well in general, their inability to defend crosses means that the opposition will use that against us. And there's a nervousness there. And it was a problem last season. And the managers had all summer to work with the players. And it's still a problem now. This is basic stuff. Defending crosses. Why is it so difficult? Is it because of the midfield? Is it because of the lack of the presence that we need in the middle of the park? Well, maybe it is. In which case it should have been addressed, shouldn't it? There was a chaotic period of the game where obviously they equalised. We scored straight away, and Bumo, who for me was the best player on the pitch today, scored 2 goals in 3 games. I think he's made a really bright start to life at United. I'd like him to use his right foot a little bit more and go on the outside because he's capable of doing that. But nonetheless, he's made a good start. They got one chalked off, then they equalised again. In fairness to the players, they kept probing. They were resilient. They didn't let their heads drop. And that's really to their credit, because it's been a tough week. And at 2-2, it's a question mark there. We kept probing, we kept prompting, we kept pushing. And, excuse me, in recent times, in situations like that, I don't think we're going to score. Today, I said watching it again with my little boy, I said I still think we'll win the game. I had a feeling we'd win the game, because I think we just desperately needed to win the game. Don't forget, Burnley got a really good defensive record, okay, in the Championship, but they founded their success really last season on that defensive unit and defensive record, and we opened them up time and time again today. I think we had 27, 28 shots, and they weren't speculative punts from distance. A lot of them were decent chances. So, in the end, obviously, it's a late goal, which Bruno scores from the penalty spot. By the way, cool as anything to take it. The captain steps up to the plate when it was needed. Bottom corner, Bruno, every single time. Keepers aren't going to save it. Why he deviated from that last week against Fulham, I don't know. Because when he takes penalties and they go in the bottom corner, even when the keeper goes the right way like he did today, he ain't saving it because he strikes them so well. But what a big moment that was. And great to see that release of energy, that release of anger, that release of euphoria, a bit of all of that. Football's supposed to be experiential. It's supposed to be about feeling strong emotions, and that was a nice moment when Bruno blasted that one in for a much needed win. Cheers. Just on to some other stuff. Amrin made some comments yesterday in his pre-match press conference, which I found quite funny and interesting. I love the guy's honesty. He was asked about his post-match comments against Grimsby, and he said, sometimes I feel like I want to walk away and leave. Sometimes I want to feel like I'll stay here for 10 or 15 years. Sometimes I love my players, sometimes I hate them. And I was thinking to myself, not that I ever would be a Premier League manager, but I was thinking, if I was a Premier League manager, that's exactly what I would be like. I would be honest to a fault. And you're asked so many boring, mundane, bullshit questions which they're expecting a boring, mundane, bullshit answer to. And what I like about him is he just comes out and says it as it is. He's like, yeah, I was emotional after the game. Sometimes I hate my players, sometimes I love them, sometimes I want to just leave, sometimes I think I could stay for, I can't remember if he said 10 or 20 years. Yeah, that's the way I am. As much as I love that honesty, that coupled with when you watch his behaviour on the sidelines, which I've done more so in the last week actually, and you think, he's a strange cookie. And some of his body language, some of the facial expressions, some of the times where he just has his head down, he's not watching the game, it's really quite strange. And it makes me wonder if he's coping, or maybe he's just a quirky character, I don't know, and he's never showed that too much before at Sporting Lisbon because he's a different kettle of fish. But some have said that against Grimsby he was a coward, he was cowering, not watching the penalties. I got the impression from his post-match comments against Grimsby when he said the penalties were not important, it was the end of the game, Grimsby deserved to go through, I'm not interested in the penalties. I felt like that, I wasn't asked about the penalties either. Now, if he's not asked about the penalties and he's not watching because of that, fine. If he's not watching because he's worried and he doesn't trust the team and he's a nervous wreck, that's different. So you're weighing that up. Well, is he a nervous wreck or is he just pissed off? It doesn't help his cause that against Fulham, he wasn't watching corners against us. He had his head down like that when the corners were being taken, or free kicks and set pieces. He didn't watch Bruno's penalty against Fulham. He didn't watch Bruno's penalty today. That's not because he's pissed off and angry. That indicates that he's not coping very well. I don't know if it was just on the stream that I had today that I was watching on, but the commentator mentioned it several times that the club and Amrin are going to hold talks over the international break, I assume about its future. I know he said after Grimsby, we've got one more game and then we'll discuss things. But then in light of his comments yesterday at the pre-match press conference, I just thought, well, that was put down to an emotional response after a game. I might have missed something, so apologies if I have. By all accounts, yes, there's going to be some talks over the next few weeks about his future. The club won't sack him right now. They won't. But the question mark for me, if from Amrim's perspective, is, do I need this hassle? Do I want this hassle? Can I cope with this hassle? Am I strong enough to do it? As well as obviously his pride and him believing, is he the right person to do the job? Because the scrutiny is only going to increase as the season goes on. He's had a pre-season now. He hasn't got everything he wants, but he's had his pre-season now. You look at certain aspects of our game, it's not changed at all. He's going to be asked loads of stupid questions, as he always is, but it's going to ramp up even more. The scrutiny on him is going to be even greater. The camera's on him regularly, which is why I can say what I just said before, because I can observe it now, because the camera's never not on him. It seems like, he's not never not on him, but when there's a gap in play, it just seems to go to him regularly. And as I say, his behaviour's a little bit odd at times. We go on about wanting specific players for specific positions, and we need them. Of course, we need a midfielder. We even more so need a goalkeeper. But you look at teams like Brentford and Fulham and Bournemouth and Brighton, teams that really are obviously much smaller clubs than United, and they're doing better than us. And yet, I'm sure they don't have every single player that they would want, every single tiny bit of the jigsaw puzzle perfect. They don't have that, and yet they're performing better than us. The tricky thing at United is players that might thrive at Bournemouth and Brighton and Fulham and Brentford, they're not under the scrutiny that they're under at Man United. So it's a tricky situation, I think, because we're a big club, supposedly with big aspirations, although I'm not too sure about that. And yet, in terms of ability and quality, so the scrutiny that obviously comes with that, but we're not we're not a very good team. And I think the players at times that come from those types of clubs to United are sinking under the weight of the shirt at times. And maybe Amrin, perhaps being at Sporting Lisbon, which obviously is a relatively big club, he's come to United, and obviously it's very different. And just on a couple of other points around the club, Garnacho, I think, is officially left now. I saw a picture of him, what supposedly there to watch Chelsea today, sat there on his phone. I think he's yet another cautionary tale of a young player with a lot of talent who is surrounded by people who tell him how great he is, and it's completely gone to his head. And United seem to be producing and buying too many of these types. We need someone within the club who is influential and makes an impression on these young people, either as much as or more than their entourage does, because it's becoming a problem. Greenwood's slightly different, but a really promising player who it ended really badly for at United, and you've got to question his behaviour. Rashford, the same. Garnacho, a player from our academy, His attitude's terrible, and obviously he's moved on. Sancho, a young player we brought in from the outside, whose behaviour has been absolutely abhorrent. Now, whether they like it or not, these young players are following in the footsteps. When you're a young player at Manchester United, you're following in the footsteps, for me anyway, of Roger Byrne, Eddie Coleman, Bill Fowkes, Bobby Charlton. Further on, George Best. And then obviously moving to the more recent times, the youngsters that I've been blessed to watch down the years, your Gary Nevilles, Nicky Butt, Paul Scholes. People say what they want about Giggs, he was a great football player. Johnny Evans, Wes Brown, John O'Shea, these young lads, like Wayne Rooney was bought as a kid, Ronaldo was bought as a kid. These young players that have made their name and been great players for Man United, when you're a youth player, part of the privilege of that is, and I suppose it could be seen as a pressure as well, you're standing on the shoulder of giants. And there seems to be a recurring pattern of players not being able to cope with that. People can say to me, oh, that's modern football now. There's lots of examples of that. I don't care about other teams. I'm sure it is a problem in modern football. We're Man United. You have to hold your standards high and not let cocky little scroats behave as they're behaving. But it needs to be preemptive, it needs to be preventative rather than trying to cure it once the problem becomes too big. We've got loads of promising players in our academy, but I worry about our ability to nurture these players, not just in terms of their ability as football players, but as people, because there's a problem here. You can see that. And that brings me on to the next point. What do we do with Mainu? He's at a real crossroads. Is he getting a bit big for his boots? If it's true he's asking for 150, 200 grand a week, he's got ideas way above his station. He's a promising young player who has had a number of different injuries, has had one prolonged, very good spell in the team for about 3 or 4 months over the last 2.5 years. That is not a profile worthy of saying that you deserve 150, 200 grand a week. So if he's asking for that, he needs to be flirted off. If it's a game time issue, okay, like you said, maybe go on loan, that's fine. Some people are talking about maybe go to Brighton on loan to sweeten the nut to get Baleba to come over and maybe have an option for Mainu to go to Brighton permanently. But he's at a real crossroads as well. So we need to do something about that with our younger players, because it's always been a point of pride for Manchester United, and so it should be. Darren Fletcher's another one I should have mentioned. In terms of the last couple of days of the transfer window, it shuts on Monday night, so we've got tonight, tomorrow and Monday. I think we'll get Lamens over the line. We desperately need to, because we desperately need a goalkeeper. In terms of a midfielder, I say unless we can do some cheeky move with Mainu going to Brighton and Baleba coming to us and doing something that way, I don't think we'll get a midfielder permanently, because I think we take too long to do deals unless there's something going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Possibly, if we're desperate, we could do a loan, like a Douglas Luiz or something like that. It's not ideal. It's not what a top club does. It's not what you want, but it's better than nothing. But as I said before, the Bournemouth have the perfect midfield cohesion and combination. The Brentford, the Fulham, all these teams that last season were doing better than us, really. Did they have everything they want? Probably not. We've still got a lot of talent in that team. So Amram's got to start winning games with them. He's got to start getting the best out of them. For what it's worth, just on that, I thought Bruno was good today. And as I said the other day, there's some games where him playing deeper might work quite well for us. But there's an awful lot where it's going to be a problem. So, you know what? If Mainu wants to play, he needs to, when he's on the pitch, make a bigger impression than he's making. And I think then maybe he'll get some game time, because there's definitely a gap there. And when he first broke through, it was as a holding midfield player. So what happens in the next couple of days is going to be massive. We at least need a goalkeeper. And today, a win we desperately needed a win. We got one. So I also thought, for the majority of the game, but particularly in the first half, I thought it was a really strong performance and there was some good football on show. And I like that front three interchanging and moving about and it not being fixed positions. But as I say, if you're going to do that, what was the point in signing Seshko? I know we'd have all been up in arms if we didn't sign a striker, me included. But if the manager's idea is that you don't need an actual focal point and he wants more long term to go with this flowing system like it was today and like it has been in the previous two games, and that's probably when we looked at our best, if I'm being honest, then why has he spent 60 million quid when we desperately need a midfielder and we desperately need a goalkeeper? I guess all will be revealed in the end. But a win today, happy with that. Glazers out.